Okay, well, that was a rousing challenge. Okay, so the next part of the program, it will be a discussion among the panel led by Donlyn Lyndon, and it will be a chance maybe for Will to catch his breath and us all to catch our breaths, and for the panelists to think further based on what they've seen, what they've heard from each other. And Donlyn, thanks for moderating. So come on up. It'll take us just a few minutes. We want to remove the cart here so there can be a little better sight lines. So a little patience, but you all and Donlyn, come on up.
Well, things are rearranging. And before we start the panel, I'll take the opportunity to add a couple of notes. And to once again invite you to look at an imaginary slide, because this time I've got the slide, but it's being carried away. The slide was the one that I meant to end on, but got rattled by the timing, and is one that many of you will be familiar with. It was an event on September 1st, this year, a short time ago, which was Anna Halprin's conducting a score for building community, she called it. And it was a kind of bringing back that notion of engagement with the environment, bringing back that notion of engagement with each other, bringing back the idea of movement workshops that could actually help us all to understand the place better. And I won't go through a description of the whole event, but there's a wonderful photograph you no doubt have many of you have seen of the whole, I think there were 60 people there who participated in this in a big circle holding hands and being apart, being aware, having spent 2 hours being more alert to the environment than we normally are, and finding common ground in that and seeing that as a way of moving forward to a future that has roots in the past. Yeah. So that's what I hope, have imagined in your head. I also want to reinforce what was just said about the design committee. One of the things I failed to do in my summary earlier is to speak directly to how hugely important the design committee has been in keeping this place as it is and letting it change and grow in the process. And the design committee, as if any of you don't know, is in the position of approving any improvement, landscape or architecture, to this environment. They, in fact, are in the business of approving our commons landscape suggestions. And they have been enormously diligent and great force. And two of the people who were part of the original team, Dick Whitaker and George Homsey, are on that committee now. But there may be more questions or discussions about that later, but I needed to call it out. And finally, just a comment on one of the other slides. The photograph that was of Haystack, the Edward Barnes project that Chris showed, lovely photograph. I remember distinctly the day we were interviewed by Al Boki. We had been very aware of the Haystack project, and everybody was. That was really being published and enjoyed at that point, and that was designed by Edward Larrabee Barnes. At the end of our interview, after Al looked at all of our work, going out the door, he said, with a twinkle in his eyes, "It looks Barnes-like enough for me." And he meant both this Barnes and Edward Larrabee Barnes. And that combination of thinking about structures of the place and thinking about where this sat in the culture of the time was what we were about. Yeah. So now, having exploited some of the time here, I thought you might like that little story. The thing I think we might lead with very simply in the panel, we might just ask, and you've already told us in some level, but maybe just in a recap. You've been here now. You've been here before, all of you. You've been here for a time now. You've been hearing each other talk about what this place is, and you've been talking to people out there. I mean, that's actually the number of times that various speakers have spoken about how much they learned from the people they've met just in these 2 days here is a wonderful sign of what kind of people they are, as well as what kind of people you are. But perhaps you could each say something about, in all of that in the last few days, what has become a new insight or a new idea about the place that you have learned from this set of exchanges. I'll take volunteers, otherwise I'll take executive action.
I'll start.
You'll start? Oh,
I'll
good.
start.
Thanks, Chris.
Can you hear me? If I lean forward, can you guys hear me in the back? I would say simply that I've been reminded again, well, the few days that we've been here, all of us, and especially today, I've been reminded that this was a place that the world, really, the architectural world, was looking to and learning from, particularly students, as many of you have said. And I think that is the idea that seems most powerful and persuasive, is how do we make this a place that the world can look to and learn from once again? And I would just say it as simply as that.
Well, I would add to that I think it's, and I think that what makes it so timely is I don't think this place has had, it has so much relevance once again. I think that's so important, that thinking about the broader meaning of sustainability and land use and how it's limited, there is a great opportunity, as future Mayor Will Bruder just was telling us. But, I think that's something that we all feel very positive about. Also, somebody I was talking to briefly over lunch, we were talking about how people don't really talk about architecture anymore. They talk about real estate. And, Sea Ranch has been very much caught up in that in the last couple of decades, and it's a real concern.
I think what I've learned since I've been here, and I think it's a product of the being on the tour yesterday and talking to people and being in all these houses and talking to the homeowners. I knew before I got here how marvelous the coast is. I know how amazing California is. So I haven't been surprised by how beautiful it is here, but I have been astonished at how the homeowners, how their houses and how their devotion to the house and the place is so profound, and it has elevated their lives. I've seen such joy, and it makes me excited. A lot of people were, some of them are second home. They're driving up from Los Angeles. They're like, I don't mind the 9 hours. It's okay. And, and other people left, let's say, the Bay Area, and I'm like, you're here all the time. Don't you miss the city? They're like, no. It's you. Look at. Just look, smell. So I've been really, I think it's really been you guys that, going into your world a little bit has really shown me that there, how a place can be elevated by its people and by its built structures in conjunction with this amazing landscape.
You just sort of took my steam about the individuals that own homes here, many of which we visited. It's like they are curating them. It's not like they've bought them and that they're pieces of real estate. They have bought into this place, and they feel a commitment. I remember I have a friend that has a really wonderful place in Italy, and when I got there, I said, I can't believe you own this place. And he said, oh no, Linda, it owns me. And I think that that is the way that many of the people that have bought these landmark houses here feel. And it was so apparent when they opened them up to us with our muddy shoes, etc. And I really appreciate it. The other thing that as a part of that, and as thinking about Larry and the sort of ephemeral RSVP cycles, and you look at like the condos as a performance. That's what he called it, a performance. And I said, but then it's there, and that's it. And then how do you evaluate it once it's there? And I think he saw those individual pieces. They were like a chord in the entire symphony. So you build X here, and then your response is a different chord someplace else. It doesn't, yes, you maybe rework that some, but it all each decision impacts every other decision. And I think that was his intent, both here and in explaining RSVP cycles. And I hadn't gotten it as well, and I hadn't really gotten it until this 2 days.
I was taken by the privilege of visiting the insides of so many of your homes, by the nature of the scale and proportion of the architecture that was created for you and around you. These spaces are not about windows, they're about apertures. It was like being in a movie to be in every one of these houses. And everywhere you turned, I laid down, I'm on the bed she's sleeping in right now. She wasn't there. I told my wife to lay down there because that little slot window is profound. And I think it's universal to the character of the spirit of the architecture that was developed here, that those very human nuances of craft and making, I was taken with, after 50 years by and large of these structures existing in a very harsh, tough climate, that they have been well detailed by their architects, they have been well loved and cared for by their owners, and by and large, they all are showing their age a little bit, just like we all are, but it's the real stuff. It's why I've lived my life trying to do this and why it set such a high standard when I began. I'm so happy it has become part of my life in this way right now.
So anybody want to pick up from that and go on any of those pieces? One of the things that several of you mentioned was needing to find what are the mechanisms through which the new, fresh energies can infuse the place and grow from what has already been here. Any more thoughts about what kinds of things could make that happen would be, I think, interesting. Yeah.
Well, I would start off, I think it was mentioned, I think a few people mentioned, Chris mentioned, the idea of bringing in a group of students, and I think Will brought up the same idea with having a school here. The sense I'm getting, is that, aside from one of on the obverse coin, what I found here, and I think this was also echoed in a couple of the comments, is that a lack of public spaces. That there aren't benches and there aren't little areas to gather, and and I think that's a product of the power of the vision of the houses. In fact, I think at times it works against public space. When you have these amazing private dwellings with these incredibly crafted views, and it's hard to devote your attention to the outside as much. But I think some mechanism to get, if not to start off with perhaps new homes, but perhaps to start off on the landscape and to bring a summer class of students to actually walk Sea Ranch and hike Sea Ranch and camp Sea Ranch, and come up with ideas about creating places of gathering, that where people can actually not just encounter each other on a walkway and say hi or stop and stand, but actually where they know if they go there might be other people there. And maybe it's too soon. In the Bay Area we have all these food trucks. They seem to be an amazing way to get people to go somewhere at a certain time. And if maybe, if there was a way to bring in a food truck or two on a certain day, and actually coordinate that with designing a space next to where the food trucks sit. Where they park. And so you'd have an area that, let's say on Wednesday afternoon or Saturday afternoon, you can go and you can get an espresso and you can get a taco, and you can sit around, and maybe things will build from there. There'll be a checker tournament that establishes there. You build some, things will happen outdoors. Again, I admit I haven't been here in the famous winds, so maybe this is not as realistic, but then that's also an opportunity to design, barriers for that. So some way to bring in young architects and landscape architects to work toward starting an enhancement of public spaces in the Sea Ranch.
Well, that's an interesting challenge of actually seeing the temporary and we come and we're here only part of the time, but then seeing some institutions that would also be part of the time. One of the things I think we haven't probably communicated enough to you is the amount of activities there are. I mean, and not activities of the sort that the resort hotels had, but if I'd given you a back page of the bulletin, you'd have seen this as a whole page of various meetings that people are having about bridge or bicycle or piloting or the Commons Landscape Committee or et cetera. So there's a lot going on, but it's true that that there are some places, Del Mar Center, where some people began watching this, are places to go, but there isn't a kind of hangout place, and I think I'd probably be. Somebody will tell me I'm wrong. They know where to hang out.
Well, you know, when it was first described, it was described as building a town. Didn't you say it was like building a little town? Or did you just say community, Donlyn?
I think I said community, but...
Because it is a kind of a community without a center.
And actually, in one of the last workshops, I failed to mention that one of the things that Larry did, though he was no longer specifically consultant to the development, he was asked 3 times, wasn't it, to come and hold workshops for sea ranchers. And one of the persistent themes that came up in there, with a little prodding from Larry, it must be said, was the search for a place that could be more of a center. And that also was part of the initial plans that were made by some of us for the lodge expansion, was to have a little one-block Main Street with galleries and coffee places and Office Depot and stuff like that. I know Office Depot's already out of sync, but nonetheless, the idea would be some place you could go and get some services, and because you were doing it, you would encounter other people. That's one of the reasons that people have been insistent on keeping the post office. It is one of the places where people come, but since we don't use the post office very much anymore, some other mechanisms are in order, right? Yeah. Yes, Linda.
I wanted to put a plug in a sort of congratulations to Donlyn and the Landscape Commons Committee for...
Talking to the mic, Linda.
Oh, I wanted to put in a plug for
Yeah,
Donlyn.
especially now.
Yeah, now. For Donlyn and the Landscape Commons Committee. I've gone through the Area 9 booklet. I haven't seen all of the proposals. One of the things that has struck me is that many of the places, the awareness of the coastline, there are places as you go along number 1 and as you're going through Sea Ranch where that awareness has been lost in a way that I know that that was one of the driving forces in every decision that Larry made. Along with that, even sort of the small decisions of how the driveway goes in out here and the size of the parking lots. And I just, some of that, I mean, some of the care has been lost in some of the buildings, but I think it's particularly been lost in some of the landscape movements. And I think some of that can be fixed. And by managing the meadows, for one thing, so that you can reestablish in some places better connections to the coastline, strategic developments. I'm dying to see a 100-foot-long bench out here where we sat on the asphalt today. But more modest things with plantings as well. I think there's a lot that could be done. And the landscape, your group has started the ball rolling.
And we've done that with the participation of people in the area.
Yeah.
That's been, again, the whole point of the workshop.
And I think
they haven't been like Halpern workshops, I have to tell you. But they have been productive, yes.
But it seems that everyone benefits when those improvements are made.
Yes.
Could I ask a question? It is
Yes, yes, please.
Kind of my line of
This is
work.
meant to be a conversation between you. I'm just supposed to get in the way when I have to.
I would like to know what the people who are who live here, love it, and are invested in it. I'd like to know what they see as the biggest problems threatening the future of the Sea Ranch.
Is this time we
I
can
guess
open
that's
it
a
to
long
questions?
conversation.
Okay, you have to keep it suppressed until it is.
Again,
In the workshops that were held before, one of the things that did constantly get mentioned was a concern about it becoming suburban. And there was a list that Larry drew up. Again, Larry was really good at putting together workshops where everybody got involved, and also really good about planting the seeds for what was going to happen in them. But there's a list of things yes and things no. I think we sent you a copy of that. But what he was really talking about, and I think, Linda, you are absolutely right that the business of not having suburbia meant not having lawns, which meant not having a completely artificial environment that had to then be treated with a lot of artificials to maintain the way it was. What we have now instead is we've continued to have the notion of a native landscape, but we have had to control it because of fire. And so there have been concerns, and one of the things we've often heard in the Commons Landscape workshops, we've heard two kinds of things that started out being really predominant. One was, well, the amount of vegetation that was growing up and blocking views or changing the whole shape of the landscape. And the other was concerns about fire. There's a very extensive, however, fuels management program, which has been invested in well by the association and is well underway, and is part of what actually gives the force to our Commons Landscape proposals. We try to direct that a little bit. Yeah.
A nice segue here. I just was thinking, right now there is no marker on the highway to tell anybody who happens to just be on the trail from Canada down the coast what this place really is. There is parking provision at the site of your chapel and your fire station. Would that be an interesting place to set up a storyboard that talks and people can stop like a historic marker? You are historic. You have the ability to also qualify for a historic registry site. Forget UNESCO. First start with just protecting it that way. But wouldn't it be great if we had the story of the environment, sustainability, what this place really means, and it doesn't have to be a long marker, and maybe the food trucks can come there a couple days a week, you know? Get a little side thing going. Maybe one of you run the food trucks. That'd be really great. A little side income for the association. Wouldn't hurt. But wouldn't that be nice? Because right now we come into a sign. We don't know if we're there or we've left for the average person, right? And what about a shout out for all you've done and all that this represents? Might be a simple thing and not very expensive to accomplish.
Also, Donlyn, to get back to what you said about the Main Street, I'd really like to endorse reviving that idea of a kind of short Main Street that spilled down toward the water just north of the lodge, particularly if it could be a vehicle for bringing in some new architectural energy. If you could imagine residential units on the upper floors and retail and some kind of sense of a different dynamic, a different approach to that shared space, a different approach to retail and commercial space here. And also, if you were to think carefully enough about the program and the architects you invited, it could be, kind of injection of new architectural ideas and thinking that was simpatico with, these original ideals.
I can't not advocate for some sort of cultural center or museum, given that my wife is a museum. I can't not advocate for some sort of cultural center or museum, given my wife is a museum professional and works in that field. But I think a sense I get, I teach history of architecture and art, and I've been doing so for over 25 years. And I'm a big advocate of California, and I want to tell the students, and I go around other places and talk about what makes California, and what makes it special and important. And I usually say, well, there are several aspects of California that are noteworthy. the first place in the world to develop an extensive network of freeways, Larry, we haven't talked about it today, but Larry Halpern wrote a book about freeways. He was fascinated with freeways and the view you get from the freeways, how you see it, and how you experience it. It's almost like for him it was experiencing the world at 60 miles an hour, like as if you were a fly going around a sculpture and seeing it from all these angles and motions. He was extremely excited about that. So freeways are a big part of California. And I talk about Disneyland, and the theme park as another, something California gave to the world, this idea of, which Charles Moore was completely fascinated with. He was fascinated, in fact, with all the small theme parks, too, the Nut Tree and the like, the Madonna Inn, all of that. He wrote a great essay in the mid-'60s on that. So, this is something California gave to the world. And then I talk about Sea Ranch. I say there's also architecture. There was Cliff May and the Ranch House, and then there was Sea Ranch. And Sea Ranch is something that you don't find. You never really had that elsewhere in the world, where you took modernist architectural ideas, you took an attitude toward landscape and the environment, and you took a kind of free-form spirit, that California spirit, and you brought them all together and you created this place on the land. And I said, Sea Ranch is a really important place. It's a place that California, that we gave to the world. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have some sort of, more than just a marker, but a museum or a small cultural center that people can stop next to the lodge, and they can act there, and a place that could hold exhibits, it could hold lectures and other events that actually talks about the Sea Ranch idea, how it started, how it's going, where it's going, and communicates that to the world. That this, and it's a kind of, I think it's a recognition of how important this place is, and that it's important to tell the rest of the world when they pass by, because I can imagine thousands and thousands of people driving by and not knowing. Just because there's not, like Will says, there's nothing to tell you on the road. But if there was something, if there was just a sign that said, museum, Sea Ranch Museum, I think a lot of people would stop. And I think it would start, and I think then there would be, it's the other thing I wanted to mention, is what I get a sense of is from talking to people, but also being here, is that it is somewhat insular. And it would be a way to establish dialogue with the outside, with Sonoma County and Mendocino County, but also with the larger California, and then with the global environment, a way to communicate with them, to tell your story to them, and to have them come to you and give their impressions and talk, and a place for them to stop also and meet people, because I think that would all be really great.
I'm really fascinated by these ideas, and I think it would be great if there was a place for people to meet informally. Also, I'd love it if there was a place to get a cup of coffee where you didn't have to drive up that hill. But honestly, for all of these ideas that we who don't live here are discussing, is there ambivalence on the part of the people who do live here about not being so isolated and being more open up to a general public?
I was about to say that, and we soon, I hope we can open to the discussion, but there definitely is considerable anxiety about, especially hordes of people coming up and down the highway as an image. Not that it's ever really a fact, but as an image. There are some other things that we haven't. I really want to come back. I'm sorry. I really want to come back to have input from the audience. But there are a couple other things that I think have been brought out in this panel that haven't actually been commented on. One is the similarity of the audience here, the age demographic particularly, but not just the age demographic. The business of it being a community that has a great look-alike status, and that is actually not opening to the rest of the world in the way that it might, though there's nothing intended or actually in the mechanisms, except maybe price, that are making that happen. It is originally the case that the original layouts had little small lots and great big lots, and that was precisely because it was intended to be a multi-economic status. Which unfortunately the economy has made everybody rich. Well, sort of rich. But so that is a challenge that hasn't been brought up. If you have any others, comments on that, or how to kind of move in any way about that direction. You probably don't.
Would there
Yes,
be right now we look at all the intellectual energy, just where a lot of you are coming from, San Francisco. What if it becomes a conference retreat space that again serves as a community resource? I mean, this barn could be at the heart of it, but a connected place that people could come, could stay, could network, could be here. Doesn't have to be big, but again, the sort of privilege of ideas infiltrating the community, and for its life to go on, it's going to be very interesting. I don't know how many real estate people are in the audience, where that world is right now, but it seems like there's such hunger in the city, and somebody that lives in, 400 square feet in a micro down in San Francisco would be delighted to come and have 400 square feet in the landscape. And wouldn't that be a wonderful energy that could cross back and forth? It would fit into the scale and the texture, and could be quite good.
So then we're actually getting some notions about institutional things and programmatic things that could bring new people into this place on a temporary basis, who then might, like so many of the people in this audience, would say they came one day and then they got smitten.
Right.
And if we actually attracted a larger range of people for a larger range of purposes, that may be something that could begin to instill a dynamic in the community itself. Yeah.
And another thing, last week I had the privilege of being in Reno, Nevada, at a museum that I'm close to. But what's more important was it was the third triennale, so every 3 years they have a workshop on art plus the environment. So every 3 years, they start working the day it ends and whatever. In the course of 6 years, they have brought the world to this museum because of the conversation and the quality of the subject matter. This intersection between art and environment, and what better place than Sea Ranch to engage that sort of conversation. And every 3 years, it comes up on the cycle that people are talking and thinking about it, and they come, they enjoy, it can be choreographed. And again, there's just this great burgeoning of all kinds of positive things about where it's at. I guess we're going back to the question of the audience. Has Airbnb hit Sea Ranch? Or don't you know?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and that has its own pluses and minuses, as we read about every day in the paper if we read the paper or website. Lots of new ways to invent this identity.
Yeah. Yes.
I think a couple of things. One, I think it's important to stress that the opportunity for Sea Ranch is not just about the anniversary. It's not just because this happens to be the 50th year. There are a lot of ways in which this experiment is timely. Again, many of us have touched on that. I can't tell you how many young architects I know are looking carefully at the work of Charles Moore again and fascinated by it and him and his writing as well as his design work. I think his writing, for those of you who don't know it, holds up exceedingly well. I've been looking at a lot of his writing about Los Angeles, for example, which holds up especially well. But there are a lot of young architects thinking about history again, thinking about vernacular. There's a really interesting conversation beginning to happen about regionalism in this global age. What does that mean? A lot of young architects are thinking about those questions. Some of the architects I mentioned this morning in my remarks are looking again at some of these vernacular forms and bringing them back in new ways. So I think there are a number of ways in which the time is right to have this conversation about a more forward-looking attitude about the new kinds of design that could be brought here. And then to get back to the question about diversity and bringing new people in, you have to give people more places to come in and experience. So not just houses for rent, but different kinds of ways to experience it, whether that means a hotel or more multifamily or more affordable housing, however that conversation plays out. It has to be, instead of the vast majority of places that people come to experience this landscape being the single-family house, there being other options, whether it's retail or hotel or any of the other things that we've talked about, done, of course, in a sensitive way, and you have to be very careful about it and the architecture and how it's handled. But if that's the goal, if the goal is to bring a different cross-section of the community into this place and to get them to understand its value and its importance and its history, there have to be more places for them to kind of attach themselves and get a taste of the place.
Well, I think we really need to open up to questions, and so do you want to have your break first? We'll have an early break, and that'll give us more time for questions and discussion afterwards. Yeah.